Welcome to Stories of Brave Mothers, a channel dedicated to telling real and touching stories of brave mothers from around the world.
They say a mother's love knows no limits. But what if it had to be measured in miles? Every day, rain or shine, a brave mother walks 6 miles on foot to provide for her family. While she carries the weight of the bills on her shoulders, in her heart she holds the hope for better days. And at home, a wounded husband and 2 daughters who depend on her for everything. But what happens when life decides to throw even greater obstacles in her path? Get ready, because this is a story of endurance, courage, and a love that knows no boundaries. In the sunlit countryside of Queensland, Australia, where the heat seems to dance above the asphalt and the wind carries the sweet scent of eucalyptus, lived a brave mother named Emily Carter. At 38, she already knew the weight of responsibility more than she cared to admit. Her modest home sat on a dirt road about 6 miles from the small town of Ravensfield, where she worked in a local grocery store. 6 miles, just a short line on a map to most people, but for Emily, it was the daily road between survival and despair. Life hadn't been kind in recent months. Her husband, Daniel, a dedicated carpenter who loved his craft, had suffered an accident at work. A misstep on some scaffolding left his right leg badly injured, with multiple fractures and a long, painful recovery ahead. Suddenly, the man who had always been the family's provider was confined to a chair, dependent on others for almost everything. The heavy silence on the nights after the accident was almost tangible. Emily remembered the sound of crutches scraping across the floor, the grimaces of pain Daniel tried to hide, and the constant effort to keep their daughters, Lily and Sophie, from realizing how serious things really were. At 14 and 15, the girls were at an age where dreams were big, but life's shadows had already begun to creep in. On one sweltering night, Emily made her decision. There was no reliable public transportation in that rural area, and the family's car had been broken for months, repairs far out of reach. The only option was to walk to the grocery store every day. 6 miles there, 6 back, 12 in all. But for Emily, it wasn't about the distance. It was about what that walk meant. Food on the table, bills paid, dignity intact. That first morning, the sky was still painted in shades of orange when she tied her worn sneakers, grabbed her water bottle, and glanced back to see Daniel sitting on the porch, his leg in a cast. He tried to smile, but his eyes spoke a different language, guilt and worry. Emily returned the smile, steady and reassuring, as if to say without words, "It's going to be okay." The path was a mix of paved road and dirt trails, lined with barbed wire fences where curious kangaroos sometimes stopped to watch. The smell of damp earth after morning dew, the calls of galas in the trees, and the distant rustle of dry grass became the soundtrack of her new routine. But every step was a reminder of the challenge she had embraced. The sun, gentle in the morning, turned merciless on the way back, and the dry wind stung her skin. At the grocery store, she was more than just an employee. Emily was a familiar face to everyone. Lately, though, customers had started to notice the exhaustion she tried to hide. Her hands, always busy, bagging groceries or restocking shelves, would tremble slightly by the end of her shift. Still, she kept her smile. She knew no one could carry her burden for her, and that no matter how comforting, compassion didn't pay the bills. Home brought another kind of challenge. After walking 12 miles and standing for hours, Emily still cared for Daniel and the girls. She made dinner, checked homework, did laundry, and adjusted her husband's legs so he could rest. Sometimes she fell asleep sitting on the couch, her head tilted to the side, until the whistle of the kettle woke her. Despite the exhaustion, there were moments Emily kept close to her heart, her fuel to keep going. Lily, the quieter one, had started helping with chores without being asked. Sophie, the more outgoing, left little notes on the bathroom mirror. "You're the strongest mom in the world," or "Everything's going to be okay." These small acts of love were like silent hugs, reminding her she wasn't entirely alone in this fight. But the road wasn't always safe or easy. Some mornings, Emily battled sudden storms, the rain soaking her clothes and making every step harder. Other days, the heat soared near 104 degrees, making the ground feel like it might melt beneath her feet. Once, a speeding car splashed through a muddy puddle, drenching her from head to toe, drawing laughter from the young passengers. Emily didn't respond. She just kept walking. Every step was a silent vow not to let exhaustion, the weather, or the lack of understanding from others defeat her. What few people knew was that Emily carried deep fears inside her. Fear that Daniel might never fully regain his mobility. Fear that her daughters would miss her presence during the most important moments of their lives. Fear that, one day, her body simply wouldn't hold out. But she also carried one certainty. Brave mothers don't stop because of fear. They walk, even if it's 6 miles, every single day, because the love for what they protect is greater than any pain. As the weeks passed, Emily's routine began to shape not just her body, but her spirit. Her legs grew used to the long distances, and her mind found in the sounds and sights along the way a form of meditation. She learned to tell the change of seasons by the wildflowers blooming along the roadside, by the behavior of the birds, and by the color of the sky at dusk. But no matter how much she tried to convince herself she was in control, Emily knew life always had its twists, and one was just around the corner, bringing new challenges that would test not only her physical endurance, but also the strength of her heart. The first weeks of walking every day had already left their mark on Emily's body. The soles of her sneakers were starting to wear thin, and her socks, always damp from sweat or rain, now showed small holes. What had once been a new, almost motivating challenge had turned into an exhausting routine, where each day brought a different kind of weight. Physical, emotional, and even spiritual. The Australian summer shows no mercy. One January morning, the thermometer read 90 degrees before 8 o'clock. The asphalt shimmered under the sun, releasing that familiar scent of hot road. Sweat slid down Emily's neck, tracing a line along her spine, while the horizon seemed to move farther away with every step. She carried a water bottle, but she knew it wouldn't last halfway through the walk. Her mouth was dry, her tongue clinging to the roof. With each sip, she thought of Daniel and the girls, and the fear of being late for work pushed her to pick up the pace, even as the heat scorched her skin. And it wasn't just the weather. Life seemed determined to test her in every way. One morning, while crossing a quiet stretch of road, a car slowed down to match her stride. 2 men inside started making comments and laughing, a chill running through her stomach. Emily quickened her pace, eyes fixed ahead, heart pounding. Only when the car sped up and disappeared on the horizon did she take a deep breath again. But the feeling of vulnerability lingered for days, turning each walk into a constant game of vigilance. At home, things were far from easy. Daniel, no matter how hard he tried, was visibly frustrated at not being able to help. He spent hours sitting on the porch, hammering bits of wood into miniature pieces, as if the work could quiet his mind. But Emily saw his fleeting glances, heavy with worry and sometimes with shame. He felt like a burden, and though she told him over and over they were in this together, that he had nothing to feel guilty about, she knew words couldn't always erase the pain of a man who had always taken pride in providing for his family. The girls, Lily and Sophie, had their own battles. Their school was in town, and they took the bus, but now they carried more responsibilities at home. Lily, the more reserved, seemed to shoulder the world without complaint, while Sophie began showing signs of rebellion, perhaps her way of coping with the stress. One night, Sophie came home late, her clothes smelling faintly of cigarettes, and when Emily asked, she simply replied, flat and cold, "I don't want to talk about it." That hurt more than the blisters on Emily's feet. Then came the day fate decided to push her to the edge. It was a gray morning, and she had left home before sunrise. The light drizzle at first seemed harmless, but soon it turned into heavy rain. The cold wind made her hands tremble, and water seeped into her shoes, each step a squelching sound. She arrived at the store completely drenched, teeth chattering. She worked her entire shift in damp clothes, and by afternoon, the chills had set in. The next day, the fever came. Emily could barely stand, but the thought of bills piling up wouldn't let her rest. Even with a pounding head and aching body, she got dressed and started the walk. With every mile, her strength drained away. Halfway there, her legs began to give out. She sat by the roadside, staring at the green fields blurred by her dizzy vision. For a moment, she thought about giving up, turning back home, lying in bed, and letting the world spin without her. But then she remembered the girls waiting for dinner and Daniel, who had no way of chasing after anything. She drew a deep breath, stood up, and kept going, step by step, forcing her body to move forward. It was during this phase that a new problem appeared. The money Emily earned no longer covered everything. Between Daniel's medication, the girls' school supplies, and the utility bills, little was left for food. She started taking small side jobs after her shift, cleaning a nearby cafe or organizing boxes in a storage room. That meant she often got home late at night, only to wake up at 5 in the morning and start all over again. The accumulated exhaustion began to show in small ways. She forgot the salt in the dinner, left laundry hanging outside in the rain, or forgot to buy something essential. One day she came home and realized she'd left the back door unlocked all day. Those lapses scared her. She couldn't afford to lose control. In the middle of all that pressure, a small light appeared. An elderly neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, who lived 2 blocks away, began offering her rides on rainy days. Emily accepted a few times, but quickly realized she couldn't rely on it. Mrs. Thompson had her own health issues, and Emily didn't want to be a burden. Still, that gesture reminded her there was kindness in the world, and she held onto it like someone clinging to a life raft in rough seas. Emily's body began sending louder warnings. The blisters on her feet hardened into thick calluses. Her knees creaked like old wood, and her lower back burned by the end of each day. One Saturday, while cleaning the house, she felt a sharp pain in her left leg and nearly collapsed. She sat on the kitchen floor, hands over her face, fighting back tears. She didn't want the girls to see her weak. And then came the news that made everything feel heavier. The doctor said Daniel would need a few more months before he could even try walking without crutches. The bone wasn't healing as expected. Emily left the clinic feeling the world close in, the air growing denser. She knew what that meant. More months of this journey, more days of struggle, more exhausted nights. Even so, something inside her refused to give in. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe pure love, but she kept waking up before sunrise, tying her worn sneakers and heading down the road. The sky, sometimes painted pink, sometimes veiled in clouds, was like a canvas that shifted its colors as her steps marked the earth. But Emily knew she couldn't go on like this forever. And it was on a silent morning, watching a family of kangaroos cross the road ahead of her, that something began to shift inside. It wasn't surrender, but it also wasn't the same brute force that had carried her this far. It was as if she sensed that a new phase, harder, more decisive, was about to begin. A phase where walking alone might no longer be enough. Winter arrived early that year in Ravensfield, bringing freezing dawns that cut through the skin like invisible blades. Emily woke before 5, while the house was still asleep. Each morning, she felt the cold seep under her clothes, finding the muscles already worn from her daily walks. Still, she tied her sneakers, now with soles almost completely smooth, and set out for another day. The once vibrant blue sky now greeted her in shades of gray. The wind swept dry leaves across the road, and the dew turned the ground into small, slippery traps. Emily adjusted her pace, mindful that a fall could change everything. She knew her family depended entirely on those daily trips, and any misstep could undo everything she had been holding together. The grocery store was facing hard times too. The owner, Mr. Howard, mentioned that sales had dropped, and he might have to cut employee hours. Hearing that, Emily felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. If she lost part of her income, there was no backup plan, no savings, no relatives nearby to help. That day, on her way home, she looked at Daniel sitting on the porch, trying to hide the pain in his leg, and realized she couldn't show her own worry. That night, while washing dishes, she overheard a conversation between her daughters in the next room. Lily was saying she could drop out of school and get a job in town to help. Sophie, her voice trembling, said she could sell her phone to buy food. Emily stopped, holding the plate in her hands, feeling her eyes burn with tears. She didn't want her girls to carry that kind of weight so soon. She went into their room, hugged them both, and told them firmly that all they needed to worry about was school. She would take care of the rest. Deep down, she knew she was making a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. Days later, an incident changed the way the whole community saw her. It was an especially cold morning, thick fog covering the road. Emily was walking briskly, trying to keep warm, when she spotted something on the shoulder. A car, flipped over, its front completely crushed. Without a second thought, she ran toward it. Inside was an unconscious woman with a deep gash on her forehead. The smell of gasoline hung heavy in the air, and Emily knew she had to act fast. With effort, she pried the door open, unfastened the seatbelt, and dragged the woman away from the vehicle. She pulled out her phone, called emergency services, and stayed there until the ambulance arrived. By midday, the story had spread across town. At the grocery store, customers spoke proudly about the brave mother who, despite being worn out from her daily walks, hadn't hesitated to save a life. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly neighbor, came to her house with a homemade cake and said, "Emily, you're not just a brave mother. You're the heart of this community." Emily thanked her, but in her heart, she felt she had done nothing more than anyone else would have. The gesture, however, had unexpected consequences. The next day, when she arrived at work, Mr. Howard called her into his office. Despite the store's financial struggles, he told her he wouldn't be cutting her hours. In fact, he was giving her a small raise in recognition of the effort and dedication she had always shown. Emily left with her eyes brimming, feeling that, for the first time in a long while, the weight on her shoulders was just a little lighter. But there was still another challenge ahead. The doctor had scheduled a new evaluation for Daniel, and Emily went with him to the appointment. The results were a mix of hope and challenge. He could begin an intensive physical therapy program to try to regain part of his mobility. It meant more expenses, but also the possibility that he could return to work someday. Emily held his hand and told him they would find a way, just as they always had, and they did. Emily began waking even earlier to take extra shifts, cleaning offices before heading to the grocery store. The fatigue was almost unbearable, but she clung to the idea of seeing Daniel on his feet again. The girls started selling homemade sweets at school to help pay for their father's therapy, and in a way, that struggle brought the family even closer together. The turning point came months later. On a spring afternoon, Emily was walking home when, as she neared the porch, she saw Daniel standing, leaning on a cane, smiling at her. The tears came instantly, without her being able to stop them. He took a few unsteady steps and hugged her tightly. "You never let us fall," he said. "Now it's my turn to help you stand." In time, Daniel returned to small carpentry jobs, and the family's income began to stabilize. Emily cut her walks down to every other day, sharing the route with a bicycle that a neighbor had repaired and gifted her. Still, that 6-mile road remained part of her life, not as a burden, but as a reminder of everything she had been able to endure. Years later, Emily still looked back and remembered every cold morning, every drop of sweat, every moment she thought she couldn't go on. But above all, she remembered the love that had kept her moving, because in the end, it was never about the distance traveled, but about what it represented, the quiet courage of a brave mother who walked for love and, step by step, rebuilt her family's path. And as the sun set behind the hills of Ravensfield, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Emily knew that road would always be part of who she was, and that no matter what the future might bring, she would always find the strength to keep going. If this story touched your heart, remember, there are brave mothers walking every single day, facing challenges we don't always see. And it's because of stories like this that we're here, sharing courage and hope. So, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share this video with someone who needs to believe it's possible to overcome, even when the road feels far too long. Together, we can spread inspiration and love across the world.